Last week we began analyzing the Nimzo-Indian defense, and we'll continue with that in this week's episode. The opening is introduced of the white's first move d4, and in this week's episode we will continue by analyzing some of the different moves white can choose for his fourth move.
As we said in our last episode, white has lots of moves to choose between, and most popular are e3, queen to c2 and knight to f3. But there are of course many other moves for white, like for example queen to b3 in this position.
This move has roots which reaches quite far back in time, and the variation is considered solid, but is rarely played. The reason for its fall out of favor lays within black's answer to this move.
In this position, the bishop on b4 is threatened. There are numerous ways for black to protect the bishop, and the best option being c5. Black can of course capture on c3, but after white recaptures with the queen, white has a nice pawn structure and the bishop here in a fairly open position.
So instead of capturing on c3, black should play c5, protecting the bishop. White takes the pawn, and now black plays knight to c6. White continues to develop and play knight to f3, and black plays knight to e4. Black uses the pinning of the knight to get his own knight into the center, and white has to play bishop to d2 unless he wants to have a weak triple pawns in the c-file.
After bishop to d2, black exchanges on d2 and then takes on c5. The position is equal and both sides have equal chances, but the fact that white has such a passive position has made this a fairly unknown variation.
Let us now take a look at one other possible move for white. As we said, the most common variations occur after e3, queen to c2 and knight to f3, but we will wait until next week's episode before we begin analyzing one of these moves.
Instead, we'll take a look at white's fourth most popular fourth move, namely f3. The idea behind the move is quite clear: to stop the f6 knight from reaching e4, and of course to open up the possibility to play e4 in the future.
It's best here for black to react against white's position, and that is best done by stopping white's advances in the center by playing d5. c5 is also playable as well as castle kingside, but they give white quite nice opportunities.
White has to continue to fight to make e4 possible. Otherwise, f3 would be a useless move which will only hinder the own knight from developing to its natural square on f3. And so white plays a3. Black can choose between either retreating with the bishop to e7 or to capture on c3, transposing the game into the so-called Samish variation.
After the bishop to e7, e4, an exchange on e4, e5 and d5, we have reached a position where white has the more active position, but also a position riddled with holes and weaknesses. But even though white is considered to have a small advantage.
After bishop takes on c3, white recaptures with the pawn and black plays d5. Black tries to open up the position so that the white king will be as much exposed as possible. White captures on d5 and black takes back with the knight, making the knight active while targeting the white pawns. The pawn on c3, for example, cannot be protected by bishop to d2, because after that black exchanges pawns on d4 and then plays queen to h4 check, winning the pawn on d4 after g3 and queen takes on d4.
White does of course have better options than bishop to d2, and this position is quite equal. Once again, white has the more space and more central pawns, but also many weaknesses. But with this, we will end this week's episode of The Opening School. We'll be back again next week, so see you then.